Our goal is to be the church of the future. The 21st century mystery temple. A place where the church is a tool for human development, human growth and evolution, the recovery of black people's humanity and dignity, and a power center for black self-determination. We're doing it in every city that we're in, and we're going to do it in every city we want to go to in order to facilitate the consciousness raising of black people. Our goal, simply said, is to restore our people to our original place of power and dignity in the world. Amen.
Hello, hi everybody. Come on in. I want to give everybody a moment to bring their drinks in and get comfortable and join us in this conversation that I'm so excited to facilitate today. Today we are having Black conversations, unlearning social conditioning. I want to thank you for joining us. And in this episode of the Village Chat, we are having some very necessary Black conversations that is intended to be disruptive. I'm TORI ALAMAZE, and I will be facilitating this conversation. I'm honored to facilitate this conversation. So I initiated this gathering not only because our guest is an expert and has spent his entire life studying Black liberation theology, but it's time. Now is the time to bust open and disrupt beliefs that no longer serves us and beliefs we are unaware of. If systemic racism is well baked in all institutions, then the Black church has also been affected. You will have an opportunity in this conversation to also engage with us and ask questions. So we ask that you place some of your questions in the chat so that we can see them and acknowledge you at some point in our conversation. We want to be able to hear you and know that you're here and also answer the questions that you may have. So before we go in, I would like to introduce you to our interviewer, Malaika Jabali. Just a moment. Malaika Jabali is a Brooklyn-based lawyer, writer, and activist. She is a frequent political contributor for The Guardian. Her writings on politics, race, and culture have also appeared in Essence, Glamour Magazine, The Intercept, Very Smart Brothers, Cosmopolitan, and elsewhere. She is a finalist for the New York Association of Black Journalists Media Award for her debut political feature, The Color of Economic Anxiety, published in Current Affairs magazine. Malaika received her master's degree and law degree from Columbia University, where she was an editor for the Columbia Journal of Race and Law. Currently, she examines housing policy for the New York City Council and is the co-chair of the grassroots organization Operation Power to bring Black radical politics to New York City and throughout the country. She's also a little sister to me. And our special guest is Reverend Menelik Kimathi. Reverend Menelik Kimathi is the presiding bishop, chief executive officer, and chairman of the board of the Shrines of the Black Madonna of the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church. He holds the title reserved for the presiding bishop, Jeramogi. That's what we call him. The Detroit native received his Bachelor of Arts degree in theology and philosophy from the University of St. Thomas. He matriculated to Yale Divinity School, where he earned a Master of Divinity degree while serving as the president of the Yale Black Seminarians and the pastor of the Black Church at Yale. He is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. However, he regards his most profound educational experiences to have come from the 30 years spent under the direct tutelage of his mentor and the Shrine's founder, the renowned theologian and celebrated author, Bishop Albert B. Clegg Jr. Bishop Kimathi has been pastor to churches in Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, Hartford, and New Haven, Connecticut. He is a widely sought after preacher. As a respected leader in the national Black community, he is regularly called upon to speak at colleges, universities, conferences, and rallies. He is also an authority on African and African American history. He has organized historical projects in conjunction with many colleges and universities through the Shrine bookstores and cultural centers. He has significant influence on American political life through the Black Slate, Inc. He has received many awards and honors, including the NAACP Unity Award. He has been a regular guest on radio and TV, including CNN. He has been featured in 3 documentary films highlighting the work of the church. He oversees churches in Detroit, Atlanta, Houston, Calhoun Falls, South Carolina, Monrovia, and Gonson City, Liberia, as well as many other institutions, organizations, and programs operated by the Shrine of the Black Madonna worldwide, including the 4,000-acre Butaland Farm in South Carolina. And so without any further ado, I would love to welcome my friend Malaika Jabali and Jaramogi.
Welcome, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Jaramogi. Good evening. I'm so looking forward to our conversation today. And I also want to add to my bio, proud alumnus of Akibaland Academy in the Shrine of the Black Madonna. I was raised in the church in Shrine 9 in Atlanta. And my church home is also in Detroit, where Jaramogi Kimathi is based. So our theme today is unlearning social conditioning. But with that, it is important for us to also acknowledge our past. We talked about our founder, Jaramogi Abebe Ajamin, and our church was born out of similar conditions that we're seeing right now. So we can't talk about conditioning without talking about our conditions. He was more widely known as Albert Clegg, and he wrote in his book, Black Christian Nationalism, "There is no institution in America, no aspect of American life that does not basically reflect the declared inferiority of all Black people." So Jaramogi, Bishop Kimathi, I want to ask you, how does this idea of Black inferiority or the myth of Black inferiority relate to the social conditioning that you talk about today?
Well, the myth of Black inferiority is a foundational value of Western civilization. You could not have the structure, the social structure that we deal with today with all of the various institutions without the myth of Black inferiority, because the declared inferiority or the dehumanization of Black people is what made it possible to build the wealth and power of the Western world. And not just America, but also Western Europe too. So the myth of Black inferiority is like a gigantic conspiracy of the white world to devalue Black life and then build a whole civilization around that fact. And so every institution reflects the declared inferiority of Black people. We don't just get violence from the police. The educational system does us violence. The healthcare system does us violence. The political system does us violence. It's every aspect of society deals with Black people as less than. And really, more than less than, we are equipment, not people. And we're not really regarded as citizens. So when people start complaining about the way we're treated by police and things like that, they don't understand that that is exactly what they're supposed to do. That is the role that the institution was created to carry out. So the declared inferiority of Black people affects every aspect of life. And it even affects us in terms of how we think, how we relate to those institutions. Most of the analysis and criticism of how Black people are treated is basically a moral complaint. We complain morally that this is unethical, this is unfair, this is unjust, or this is unconstitutional. And it doesn't have anything to do with any of that. This is This is a power system based on black people being on the outside and white people being in power. So, you know, the system is really not ours. It's not for us. It's a world system, a complex. There's only one world system. The world system is a world system of global white supremacy. And it's not for us. It doesn't serve us. It's not designed to to provide for us. We are taken care of to some extent because we carry out useful roles in the maintenance of the society. But it's like, you know, you can be a chicken and think that because they come out there and throw you some food every now and then, that you part of the family, but they're only keeping you fed because they have plans for you. You're going to serve some important role one day. And I think that is what we have to understand is our relationship to the system. It's an enemy system. And our relationship to that system is based on our utilitarian service.
Now, what you're reminding me of is when you talk about this white supremacist worldview and the way that it has affected us, we can think about the doll test that was cited in studies that ended up helping to facilitate the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case and facilitating that holding that said that desegregation had to be the law of the land. Now, I'm curious as to how that kind of social conditioning relates today. What sort of phenomenon can we point to right now that might be dependent on those same sorts of conditions?
Well, if you have a society that's built around the declared inferiority of black people and the declared supremacy of white people, then everything that you learn, everything that you read, everything that is presented to you, your educational system, it all is reinforcing this central notion of our inferiority. It's inherent in everything. There's no way to get away from it. Even our material conditions are intentionally meant to be a visible illustration of the fact of our inferiority. We have less of everything good, more of everything bad by design, deliberately. So there's no way to get away from it. It's implied in everything. Our educational system does not really teach history. It teaches a white nationalist propaganda, a story of a country that was made by white people, for white people, by white people. And it's the biggest lie ever been told because black people built this country. But if you don't control the mechanisms that provide information, then we are conditioned, indoctrinated with a white nationalist propaganda so that many black people, or most black people, end up being white racists too.
Ooh, now that's the word. Y'all heard that? He said most black people end up being white racists too. That shows you white supremacy is not just about the who's saying it, but it's the ideology that's being perpetuated. We can all perpetuate white supremacy, whatever race you are. So a part of our social environment is the Black church. The Black church has been foundational to both our liberation and our exploitation. But when Jaramogi Baby Ajamin founded Black Liberation Theology, or one of the co-founders of Black Liberation Theology, he wanted to push back on that. So how has social conditioning affected the Black church specifically in the past and in the present?
Well, the church was never really given to black people as a means of empowerment or salvation. It was given to black people consciously and deliberately as a means of control. I mean, the American Bible Association came up with a system of indoctrinating slaves to basically control their behavior, because slave revolts had gotten to be too frequent, and the lash was not providing sufficient control over slaves. So there was a conscious decision made to indoctrinate slaves with Christianity for the purpose of controlling them. That message has not really drifted too far from its origins. It's a lot more glitzy, and the preachers may have more education, but they basically can't get away from the fundamental plantation theology that makes Black people docile and forgiving and not really critically evaluating our circumstances or dealing in intelligent action to change those circumstances. It's calm down, let's pray, let's march, let's appeal. It's not, you're not going to change power relationships with those approaches. And that was deliberately developed like that, and it's still like that today. Even though our vocabularies are bigger and our suits fit better, it's still the same basic message. It's a message of salvation. We've added a prosperity dimension, but the social dimension of fighting for justice and power for our people is not on the agenda of most Black churches.
Now, do you think it's important for the church to play that role? I mean, that's kind of a leading question, because we would not be members of the Shrine of the Black Madonna if we did not think that. But I'd love for you to elaborate for the audience if that's important and why, having the church be, yes.
It's foundational. I mean, in traditional African society, there was no separation between the sacred and the secular. There's no way to fight for changes in conditions in the material world without a spiritual understanding of how that is foundational to how we live our lives. I mean, everything we do is spiritual. It's related to things we can't see. Those things that we do in a world that we can see is related and motivated by things we can't see. So there is a direct relationship. You can't act like spirituality is unimportant and you a spiritual being. The reason that you fight, that you respond to injustice, that's a spiritual response. Politics and economics are spiritual because they determine how we live. Education is spiritual because it allows us to be all that God intended for us to be. So religion is intertwined. Spirituality is at the foundation of everything. So the church, in order to be relevant, an effective church is going to lead to people acting out in definite ways designed to bring about the will of God in the world. That's, if you are affected, real religion, fundamental spirituality is going to lead you to strike out and do something about the world that you live in. And you really can't help it, because as you come into contact with your spirituality, it is going to motivate you, call you, demand that you respond to things that are not right in the world.
Now, you mentioned prosperity ministry. How is it conditioning our people right now?
Well, it's messing them up. Believing that God is going to provide material benefit, or believing that God is going to provide liberation, or God is going to provide, like, God is going to do the work that we have to do. Prosperity gospel is it's a child of capitalism, because in capitalism, money is the definer of value. And if you don't have any money, you don't have any value, you don't have any rights, you are nobody without money. So when you put that value and religion together, you're going to get a prosperity gospel. you're going to end up where God can provide you with what you need. And I don't care how you dress it up and make the words more palatable or easier to digest. It's basically blasphemy. It's basically the rejection of the fundamental ideas of religion, and it's going to lead to perpetuating our condition, because we're not trying to change our conditions. If we believe that money will change our conditions, we don't need people. We need money. And so we will even exploit our own to get it. Up until the late 60s, early 70s, Black people were coming together to change our conditions with a definite dedication. But when they figured out they could no longer control Black people with threats of violence, that we were no longer afraid of those threats, they came up with the notion that we got to keep them from fighting together as a group and convince them that they can participate in the system and become prosperous. And so if we can control them with money, we can control them because we have all the money. And so things started moving away from us fighting for liberation as a group, and we started fighting for money as individuals. And we're still fragmented in that way, that we are fighting for money and status and celebrity as individuals, as opposed to changing fundamental conditions as a group.
Now, why do you think that was so persuasive for our people? And we used the church, what I was describing earlier, like with the civil rights movement or even with the Black power struggle with Black liberation theology. The church, like you said, was a fundamental part of our organizing. So because it had been used, at least as an institution, if not theologically, but culturally, we came together as a body, as an organized body in many communities. How was it so persuasive then to turn to something that could become so individualistic?
Well, we didn't have anything but the church. We didn't have other institutions. The church was every institution. It was our police force, social services institution, our school, our bank, our police force, our social service agency. It was everything. So when we had problems, we tended to solve those problems from the vantage point of the Black church and what it could do about the problem we were trying to solve. Once we began to, Jim Crow began to loosen, and we began to have other institutions that we could integrate into, we didn't feel that we needed the church in the same way. And rather than the church serving a social, political, economic function, educational function as it did in the past, it became simply a spiritual function that it served. And that weakened the church, because the church was a political institution. It affected everything. When we moved to places or moved to situations where we weren't cut off from all these other institutions, the church lost its central control, and ministers lost their central importance in the community, to be just spiritual leaders as opposed to political, economic, educational leaders, leaders in every sense of the word. Most of our leadership comes out of the church for a reason. And that's why the most intelligent people in the Black community were generally preachers. They wanted to go into church because that gave them a greater control over their own lives. But that's not true anymore. Now we go into everything, and Black preachers are not necessarily the smartest people in the room.
Uh-oh, some shots fired. Theological shots fired. Now, I want to go back a little bit further. I'm sure you've heard of that concept of post-traumatic slave disorder, and it talks about ways that our lives as enslaved people still shows up today. And there is a wonderful, AJ Plus did a segment on it with the clinician, the Black woman who came up with this idea. And I'm curious, for someone who has studied Albert Clegg, Jaramogi Baby Ajamin, and studied his work, and we talk about Black inferiority, what are your thoughts about that, about how that enslavement might still be affecting our conditioning, still be affecting, our psychology?
Well, it definitely is, because we all are influenced by the Declaration of Black Inferiority. It explains a lot about our behavior. A lot of our behavior is compensatory. We're compensating for feelings of inadequacy, lack of esteem, being highly competitive and easily threatened by the success of other Black people. All these things suggest a fundamental insecurity. Our founder came up with a concept or a process. He claimed that he named the process niggerization, because you're not born a person believing in your own inferiority and believing that you're less than, and believing, having a negative belief system about you and your circumstance and the people that look like you. That's something that has to be taught, and that's a process of reward and punishment conditioning. We were rewarded for acting like less than a human being, and we were punished for acting like a human being. Now, you do that to people for 400 years, it's going to have some residual. It's going to leave a mark. They're going to be some effects that we carry forward, and not only that, the nature of operant conditioning or niggerization conditioning is that it is designed to be transferred not just by the society and not just by the oppressor, but by your own community, particularly your parents. The people that raise you condition you in order so that you can function in society and have a nominally productive and happy life. But when you start to have big dreams and big aspirations, they feel that those things become dangerous to you, and they try to tamp down your greatness. They don't want you to be great. They want you to just fit in, to be a cog in the machine. And so a lot of times when you have high aspirations or strong belief in what you can do or what you might be able to accomplish, you lose a lot of friends and end up alienating yourself from a lot of family, because you're breaking the mold and moving out too far. And because of their conditioning, it makes them feel uncomfortable. Right now, this conversation will be making, inevitably, people feel uncomfortable because we are bumping up against their condition.
That actually reminds me, one of the last times I saw Jaramogi in person, I went to Detroit, and I'm so thankful. I mentioned this in our last village chat, but I'm so thankful to have this church as a home. And a part of my political reporting, actually the one that won an award, was for my coverage of the Midwest. And I went to Detroit, but then I realized that there was a story in Milwaukee, which is just a short few-hour drive away. And I was going because there was an anniversary of Black Uprising in 1967 and 1968. And so I went in 2018 to look at the 50th anniversary of this. And so that was the last time I saw Jaramogi, because he let me stay in the housing in our missionary training center in Detroit those 2 years ago. So I wouldn't have to pay for Airbnb the whole time. But a part of that reporting was looking at how we pulled away kind of from that conditioning that we would see amongst some of our parents in the Deep South. And so the Great Migration was a part of us trying to break free, both physically and mentally, from white terror and white supremacy. And when they came to, places like Detroit or Milwaukee or St. Louis, folks said, we can't keep operating on this level of fear. And so when they had uprising, like they rose up, they tore things on fire. There were more rebellions in 1967 and 68 than any other time before. It was like 100. So I just wanted to comment on the fact that, a lot of the people that I spoke to, and when you research it, they talk about their parents trying to keep them from protesting. And yes, there's a degree of people being frightened, for their children's lives and having concern for them, but also kind of, I think it goes along with what you're saying, mentally not wanting to shake the boat too much, rock the boat too much. And we did it anyway. So can you talk about that a little bit, ways that we have kind of risen up, and you've lived in Detroit, you're from Detroit. What are some ways we have tried to break that mold?
Well, I mean, in the conversation, it's important to remember that every generation of Black people did the best they could. You look back and, like, I've heard this comment, we are not our ancestors.
I don't believe in that, by the way.
No, that's ridiculous. We don't have our ancestors' circumstance. They dealt with their circumstance best they could. We stand on their shoulders. Their ceiling is our floor, and then we take it to the next level. So the way that a generation struggles against oppression in a given time has to do with that time and with the people of that time. So it's going to look different. In every generation, it's going to look different. And it always comes to, it always comes out and is expressed as one generation going further and faster than the previous one, and it creates friction. But this thing is a stair-step thing. We didn't get into our condition in 1 year or two. It's 400 years, and it's going to take, that's 20 generations. So it's going to take 20 generations to reverse it. It's every generation just does their part, but each generation has a different expression of fighting for liberation than the one before it. And that leads to a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of friction in the community, as they say, we want to go further than you, we want to do more than you. But they can envision more because they're standing on your shoulders. They can see the possibilities. I remember where I was talking to my father about Barack Obama when he was running for president. My father was like 95, 96 at the time. And he said, he'll never make it. He'll never make it. They're going to kill him. He'll never make it. My father died at 97 years old. And he said, well, at least I got to live long enough to see a Black president. But in his mindset, from his frame of reference, from his point of view, that was impossible. It could not be done. And I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that younger people have come up and have broader and greater aspirations than we did in the previous generation. Because it's awfully hopeful, actually, because if we do everything that we can do, and our children run up our back and then begin to envision doing 10 times more, then we can reverse this thing in little no time. So I think that, yeah, I talked to my daughter about the fact that I think in our generation, we were still excluded from society. In 67, I was 14 years old. And I saw Detroit on fire. We were still excluded. We were still coming out of the end of Jim Crow. So we were fighting against our exclusion. And we said, we're going to build something else. And so, yeah, riots broke out and people were angry. I think the temptation that people today have to wrestle with is they have more of a feeling of inclusion in society. And so they tend to think that this stuff it belongs to us. And I think that's a difficult problem, that this stuff belongs to us, because it doesn't belong to us.
That it go yes.
Go ahead.
That's interesting to me because that's something that I think about quite a bit, and I'm thinking about it specifically in the context of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and I talk about both of them quite a bit. And they're typically framed as foils, and they weren't quite foils. They were both revolutionaries. They both wanted to transform society for Black people. But Malcolm X was more interested in changing Black people's lives. Martin Luther King believed in inclusion and changing America for the rest of society. And Malcolm X was like, I don't think there's any hope. And we've kind of adopted this idea fairly, I have my thoughts about it, but we've adopted this idea that it does, the 1619 Project from the New York Times was essentially, we built this country, we deserve its riches.
Right.
And I don't really have a lot of hope in America. I don't think they'll ever see that we built this country and we deserve to share in its riches. They haven't done that for the last 400 years. I'm not trying to wait for my successors another 400 years down the line, and we should build our institutions and try to change America to the extent that we could, but my faith isn't entirely in that. So where do you fall in that? You talked about that this is not really ours. So can you just elaborate on that some more?
Well, I mean, this is why we keep getting our hearts broken. We keep acting like we're included up under the umbrella of the democratic values of the country and under the Christian values of the country. And so we argue on that basis for inclusion and justice and fairness. We keep arguing for those things. Democratically, we say it's constitutional, we're citizens. As Christians, we are brothers and sisters, and we are supposed to look out for each other and love each other. We've been arguing, but the truth be told, there's nobody in this country Christian but us. And there's nobody democratic but us. The other people are concerned with power and power alone by any means necessary. So when we keep getting our hearts broken because we keep making this moral appeal and raising our expectations after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, World War I, World War II, the Civil Rights struggle, Obama's presidency. And every time our hopes got raised that this is going to be some dawning of a new age and something different is going to come about. And our hopes were dashed when the white backlash came, generally in the voting booth, in the privacy and quietness of the voting booth, where they rejected everything that we thought that we were moving toward. And then we end up in some dark period trying to get our mind back together because what we expected didn't come about. There is something different though about today, and that is that it is possible for Black people, people of color, and liberal white people to become a demographic majority in the country. And that is a real danger, and that's why the politics of today is so vicious. They recognize they don't have the numbers anymore. They can't win elections without cheating, suppressing votes, gerrymandering. They're really afraid that this coalition of people of color could actually gain control of the whole damn thing. And so they have taken on a strategy of stacking the courts to make sure that the courts can strike down any laws that we may put in place if we do get the majority that will preserve their privilege and power for at least the rest of their lifetimes. But it's a real danger that for them that a coalition could be built where we could have outsized influence in the country for the first time. Now, like I said, I don't hold out a whole lot of hope for that, but it is a possibility. I'm more of the vein of building our own, providing for our own, taking care of our own, and linking with Black people anywhere that they are in the world, and operating on the basis of our common African ancestry, our communal backgrounds, our spiritual roots, and building what we can build for each other.
Amen. It's a church service right now. This is Wednesday Bible study. Now, Black liberation theology was basically a response to that. It was a response. And I'll also just add this little history note too. Our founder was one of the co-founders of the Organization of African American Unity with Malcolm X before he passed away. He was one of the writers of the charter. So for folks who are listening out there, we were very tied in with this idea of Black nationalism. That's why we call Black Christian nationalism as a theology. And Jaramogi believed in Black liberation theology, where we have our own vision of what Christianity should be and what our society should look like based around communal values. And we started to add to this idea by talking about best self theology. Can you talk about that and also talk about how this could be a solution and an answer to the type of conditioning that we have been experiencing?
Well, when you go back to the African mystery temples of Egypt, the sign over the door said, "Know thyself." They understood that knowing yourself was the beginning of everything, because they understood that if you could appreciate your unique talents and abilities, you would come to know and appreciate that each person is individualized divinity. Each person is God incarnate. Each person is God in the flesh. And so knowing yourself is the beginning of a journey where you come to understand how you fit in the universe and in the universe, which is the body of God. Knowing yourself starts with knowing your people, your history, your culture, knowing that your people are resilient and creative and just and loving and hopeful. That's the people that we come from. Then you got to know yourself, your own personal story, the family you come from, the people you come from, the place you come from. I'm not just talking about Africa. I'm talking about where you come from, where your people, your parents, their parents, knowing your story, knowing yourself is the beginning of a journey. You're not going to change things outside of yourself if you don't first change things into yourself. The ghetto is created by niggas. We perpetuate it, maintain it. Those people running from gunfire in Chicago, that is a self-perpetuated circumstance. They would have to know themselves and expect something more of themselves to change their external reality and fight for something better. And so becoming your best self is just the personal aspect of that journey. If you have a potluck dinner, you bring your worst dish or do you bring your best dish? A liberation struggle, a movement to change conditions is nothing but a social potluck. You bring your best self. You don't bring all your baggage and hatred and shortcomings. You bring your best self to the table. You bring your best self to a marriage. You bring your best self to a family. What your best self is, you don't really know, because you've been told your whole life what you are not. And so working to be the best expression of yourself, of your divinity that you can be, is really the first obligation of fighting to change conditions in the world. Because as things are on the inside, so will they be on the outside. And so best self theology is really an extension of Black theology. Black theology is political theology. It's trying to change conditions, external social political conditions. Best self theology is trying to change conditions, but the conditions are internal, inside, in us, because we understand that we're only going to be able to fight effectively to change things externally if we are all right internally. The world becomes a reflection of what we are. Our families become a reflection of what we are. Our communities become a reflection of what we are. Our church becomes a reflection of what we are. So the more and the better we are, the better our external conditions, our external institutions, our ability to manifest our desires and wishes and values on society is going to be.
That's beautiful. Now we're going to go to audience questions, and I'm going to intersperse a few of mine as well. Somebody asked, actually it's Brother Ajay, he said, how do we get to a point where it's an easy transition from generation to generation? So you talked about, once we're on those steps and we can see further than other generations may have, are there ways to reduce that friction that you talked about?
Yeah, definitely. You have to have institutions. We're the only people in the world that don't train our own children. We turn our children over to an enemy institution for the institution to train them. And it propagandizes them, miseducates them. They end up smart, but ignorant of themselves. But they end up smart because they can be a doctor and they can operate on you. You can be Ben Carson and you can do neurosurgery, but you can't act in the interest of your own people because you never developed any consciousness. You have to have institutions that raise children to be Black people, to be Black people, to have pride in being Black people. If our children grow up and they don't understand that they're Africans and that everything about their life is defined about them being African, then they're going to, it's like what Francis Cress Welsing says, if you don't understand that you live in a system of global white supremacy, everything that you do know will only serve to confuse you. You have to understand that first, and then if we can do that and train children in our common past, our common challenges, and a common projected future, then we would be able to move from generation to generation with some degree of continuity. We don't even have long-term plans. We're talking about registering people to vote for election right now, and the people we're fighting against, they got a 70, 100-year plan on how to maintain power as a minority in the country. We're working for today. We don't have long-term plans. We don't have think tanks. We don't fund institutions to work out our agenda and pay people to go train to serve our interests. So without those institutions that allow us to be a conscious group, where that consciousness is increasingly rising, where we're raising our consciousness of what we can do together, what we are together, what we've been together, then every generation is essentially starting over.
I hear that. And as somebody who does, I didn't want to cut you off if you were still going.
No, I'm good.
Okay. As somebody who studies politics and reports on it, that is one of my hugest frustrations, because everyone right now, like, we're talking about, Black peoples, we're seeing our whole health infrastructure has fallen on the shoulders of Black people. We're dying disproportionately. Police are going into our cities with reckless abandon. And the only thing people say, vote. November 3rd, vote. Or 2nd, whatever it is. November, vote. And that's our only solution, is that in a couple months, people are saying that we just need to go to polls. What about in 2021? What about in 2022? What about what's happening on our block? What's happening in our community district, in our neighborhoods? The only solution cannot be to just look at, primarily these two white guys who, frankly, really, they don't have a history of caring about Black people. So we have to think long term. And so I'm really glad that you mentioned that political piece. Alamaze, did you have questions as well?
I mean, Jaramogi, your voice and your work, I can't emphasize enough how so very important and necessary it is for the world to hear you. You are so disruptive, and that's what we need in this time, in this moment. The things that you say, I mean, when you're speaking, and if I'm responding with damn, like to say we turn our children over to an enemy system, and sure they get. I mean, my daughter in DC, she learned how to speak Hebrew and Spanish, but when she came to Akibaland Academy, there was a huge difference. She's coming home talking about Marcus Garvey. She's coming home telling me about the boat, you know, with Marcus Garvey. This is stuff that she will never get at the best schools in Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I have so many smart and educated friends and people around me as Malaika that are educated, yet we do things because of, like you said, the ancestors came before us, they did things too because we had to survive. So what we name our children, you know, we give our children's names that don't represent who we are because that was stolen from us, our tradition, our culture, our names, our religion. So we're not conscious of it. There's no consciousness in schools. There's nothing. I meet people that are smart and they're fun and they have something to offer, but there is there's a lack of there's a detachment from their Blackness. And I had one of the most challenging relationships when I moved to DC with a lovely human being, but she was so detached from her Blackness that it was disturbing to me, and I had to process that on my own because she was a wonderful human being, but I was disturbed by the detachment. So everything that you're saying, you never develop any consciousness. We never develop any consciousness and pride. It hits in the gut. And what you're saying, we need to hear leaders like yourself, thought leaders like yourself, saying what you're saying to hit us in the gut, to make us uncomfortable. This is the time right now to be uncomfortable, especially if you're raising children, so that your children can benefit from the work that we're doing, from the sacrifices from what we're doing, and the unlearning. The unlearning is critical right now, because I realize even for myself that it's almost like, do you remember the movie The Wiz?
Mm-hmm.
With Michael Jackson and Diana Ross? There was a scene in the very end when they killed the witch. And I remember when I saw that as a little girl and I saw them taking off their mask. Before they took off the mask, I thought that's what they looked like.
Mm-hmm.
But when they took the mask off, you just saw different shades of brown and black. Yeah. And they were beautiful and they were radiant. To me, that's what this moment in time in America feels like to me. I feel like I'm taking off something. I'm taking off a mask. I'm unlearning and not even realizing, I've been doing this for a long time. I feel like I'm exhaling all of a sudden. Well, and that's what inspired this gathering for me.
The movie metaphor that I relate to most often is Get Out, because it's a metaphor for Black life in America, that when you lose your consciousness, you are in a sunken place. I mean, you living, you're alive, you're not all you could be. Other people are benefiting from your talents and abilities. They're using you to fuel their dreams, their lives, take care of their children, and you are stuck in a sunken place. You don't even know who you are. You're equipment. You're not even a part of the whole thing. You're the chicken in the front yard. Don't even understand that the only reason they're feeding you is because they're gonna have you for on Thanksgiving. So it's the lack of consciousness. Consciousness is the glue of a people.
Yes.
It gives us the we feeling. We have it like when we dance and when we sing. There's a certain distinctiveness about Black people that is expressed and is obvious, but we don't all feel it the same way. We don't acknowledge this kind of spiritual unity that we share. And if we ever got to the place where that we feeling kicked in and we began to act and think like a conscious group, our circumstances will change overnight.
So you think that we should have collectively one mission and that we all collectively agree on?
Well, I don't think that we have the one mission would be what's best for Black people.
Right.
I don't think that we all have to be on the same agenda, the same program, be fighting for the same thing. Like Malaika, you mentioned Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I think Martin Luther King was fighting for us to have the equality under the law, to be citizens of the country. Well, we kind of need that. And we also need self-determination to be able to build our own stuff. But if we don't have equality under the law, we build our own stuff, somebody come take it. Like they did at Rosewood and in Black Wall Street.
Right.
We need equality under the law. So that's a struggle worth fighting. Getting laws and policies that protect our rights, that's important. But also, we have to have institutions. We have to have businesses. We have to have the things that can serve our interests, whether politics are going our way or not. Jewish people are able to take care of themselves no matter who is president. No matter who's the mayor.
Yes.
They have an institutional structure within the context of the country that serves their interests. I was walking down the street in New York, and there was an accident, and it was in Brooklyn, and there was an accident, and the streets was crowded, and I'm like, I don't even understand how an ambulance can get there. These people are hurt. Mm-hmm. Within a minute, there was an ambulance that came around the corner, and I asked, well, how'd they get here so fast? Where'd they come from? And Keith told me, oh, they have their own everything. Wow. We need our own everything. It was an ambulance that came from right around the corner, had Hebrew writing on it, and took them to the Hebrew hospital. We need our own everything. That's what consciousness does for you.
How come we don't know that? How come we cannot collectively understand that we need our own everything?
Because of the myth of Black inferiority. We're still influenced by the idea that if white folks don't give us what they got and share with us, we are not going to have anything because we can't build anything. And you can't work with Negroes and they won't work together and they're not going to act right.
Now, I want to get in a question from the audience real quick before we have to get off, because we only have 2 minutes left, y'all. We could probably do this for another half hour.
We have to do a part two. We have to do
No, this was wonderful. So there was another question. It says, how do we reach the younger generation who doesn't want to have anything to do with the Black church, but does understand the importance of revolutionary practices? We can see it up there on the screen.
Well, the church kind of did that to itself with a lot of bad behavior for a long time. It alienated itself because it didn't want to have a social dimension. It was running around talking about foolishness and alienated itself from a generation of young people. I don't really believe that we have to organize on a religious foundation. Our religion says if it's good for Black people, it's good. And if you want to do something for Black people, we don't care what religion you are. We don't care if you atheist. Yeah. We don't care. We don't care if you're Buddhist, Hinduist,
white,
Shintoist. We don't care. If you want to do something for Black, because our religion is Black people. That we are looking out for the interests of Black people. And if you want to move that agenda forward, we don't care where you come from, what you're trying to do, what you believe in, because that is the fundamental. Our guiding principle is nothing is more sacred than the liberation of Black people. And that means nothing is more sacred. Nothing. Nothing. And we got to get to the point where we understand what that statement means. We are not going to be divided on the basis of religion or based on what God made somebody. If God made you a certain way, we're not going to break fellowship with you because you are the way God made you. If you want to advance the agenda of liberating Black people, then come on in. You're welcome. I think that has to be the way you do it with younger people, that all these artificial boundaries don't matter to us. We're trying to make our people better. And we're going to all die, and so y'all going to be here with the benefit. So you need to come on, get on board.
I love it. I love it. Jamoji, I am so grateful for your
Yes.
presence and your knowledge and your wisdom and your patience and for serving as a mentor for me personally. And your teachings are going to go way past your time here on earth, because it's the things that I include not only in my daily walk, but I also give it to my daughter, which one day hopefully she can pass it on to her children. So your legacy is going to continue. And it's not just me, it'll be lots of other people that your legacy will continue to move through and on. So I'm so grateful for you, and I appreciate you so very much.
Well, I'm looking at two pieces of my legacy right there.
Yes.
Malaika.
You know how I feel about you. You are absolutely brilliant. You are walking in your yes and owning your yes. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm lucky to have this space today. And I hope that we can do a part two if you guys are on board at some point for a part two.
You know, I'll do anything you want me to.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal. So we want to say thank you for our listeners for joining us, and thank you for your questions. Thank you for taking the time to tune in. We're going to have this on our YouTube channels at Word of Akibaland, Shrines of the Black Madonna. This will also be on my Instagram. YouTube will be on my Instagram page and YouTube channel, as I'm certain on Malaika's as well. So we're going to try to distribute this out to the world as much as possible so that this can be heard far and wide and touch people from all over the world, because this is necessary right now in the state of America we're in today. So thank you guys, and y'all have a good rest of your evening. Love y'all.
Take care. Love you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Our goal is to be the church of the future. The 21st century mystery temple. A place where the church is a tool for human development, human growth and evolution, the recovery of black people's humanity and dignity, and a power center for black self-determination. We're doing it in every city that we're in, and we're going to do it in every city we're going to go to in order to facilitate the consciousness raising of black people. Our goal, simply said, is to restore our people to our original place of power and dignity in the world. Amen.